The passage we're looking at this morning comes from the small book of Malachi. According to the Christian ordering of the scriptural books, Malachi is the last of the 12 minor prophets and thus the last book of the Old Testament. These prophets are minor simply because their books are so much shorter than the big guns like Isaiah and Jeremiah, not because their message is less significant. Some of the minor prophets do seem to be more relevant to a particular time period or situation in Israel's history. Malachi seems to have been written between 500 and 450 BC. The Jews have returned from the Babylonian exile and have rebuilt the temple. We can see the historical background of that period in the books of Nehemiah and Ezra. But enough time has now elapsed that people have gotten careless. They're offering sacrificial animals that are not clean and not without blemish, as the book of Leviticus requires. In this and in other ways, Micah says, the people do not respect God or observe his covenant. Unlike some other prophets, Malachi shows great reverence for the temple and the worship associated with it. The book is divided into 6 distinct oracles, cast in the form of disputes between God and the people. God, of course, wins each dispute. We don't know who wrote this book. The word Malachi means my messenger, and it probably isn't a name, but a title. The book shows some similarities to the books of Zephaniah and Ezra and may have been written in the same circle that produced those 2 books. Malachi's form of delivering his oracles is different from most other Old Testament prophets. Where they say, "Thus says the Lord," Malachi uses a question format, as we'll see in our reading. This short book is referred to at least 20 times in the New Testament, and Christian theology draws several memorable phrases from it. In chapter 2, verse 10, Malachi says, "Have we not all one Father? Did not one God create us?" And in chapter 3, verse 1, he says, or God says, "Behold, I send my messenger to prepare the way before me." And in chapter 4, verse 2, perhaps the most famous phrase from Malachi, "The Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in his wings." Let's look at this passage now as we read it from the 3rd chapter of Malachi. "I, the Lord, do not change. So you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. Ever since the time of your ancestors, you have turned away from my decrees and have not kept them. Return to me, and I will return to you, says the Lord Almighty. But you ask, how are we to return? Will a mere mortal rob God? Yet you rob me. But you ask, how are we robbing you? In tithes and offerings. You are under a curse, your whole nation, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it. I will prevent pests from devouring your crops, and the vines in your fields will not drop their fruit before it is ripe, says the Lord Almighty. Then all the nations will call you blessed, for yours will be a delightful land, says the Lord Almighty. This is the word of the Lord.